what do you think, Neil? How did I do? Can I be in your next concert? Oh, wait. This isn't a Neil Young audition? Oh, well, what is this then? Oh, hi, Sophia. Oh, it's the You Spoke, We Listened. Hey, everybody out there in infotex land. Yeah, I wanted to talk to you again about how when you speak, we listen. I don't know if you remember, but earlier this year we did a You Spoke, We Listened short movie in front of our movies that kind of went over, several suggestions that we had gathered from our customers and webinar attendees over the year of 2019. And here we are already. This was just kind of the strength that numbers that we got. And this just kind of proves the old adage that if you show people you're willing to listen to them, they'll speak more. And so we already have, 5 new ideas coming in. And we've got a lot of kudos from our clients on the shorts. They want us to keep the shorts coming. We're actually starting to, realize that, maybe we should make all our movies, short, 20 to 30-minute movies. And then yet the one movie we did this year that was, longer than 20, 30 minutes, it was an hour, was a movie followed by a panel discussion. And seems like everybody liked that panel discussion as well. We are getting, input saying, hey, talk to us more about what you do for us. And so we have updated our what to expect in an incident response test, as well as our what to expect in an audit for our incident response testing clients and our audit clients. But that brings us to our third bullet point, which is we want more technical stuff for technical clients. And, I'm already working on twisting a few arms to get that taken care of. But that actually came out of our movie, What the Cat Seems to Be, which is the one webinar we had. They had a lot more technical people came to that webinar than we're used to seeing. So, thank you, technical people, for pulling your technical self away from all of those technical problems that you get to technically solve. We love it, and we'll definitely be working on that. The one that is truly my fault, we've had a debate about it for a long time, but I don't know if you remember, but we always used to, have kind of a 2-minute warning, and we start our webinars 2 minutes late. We're not going to do that anymore. We're going to start them on time. The person that came in with that complaint was correct. I mean, we're punishing the people that show up on time for the sake of those who don't. And it's not like our movies start out with a lot of content anyway. So we're going to go ahead and start on time. This last one, out of the hundreds and hundreds of ideas we got, a half of one came in, or, one idea came in saying, hey, love Dan on the harmonica. I'd like to see more of that. And you actually already did in the introduction to this You Spoke, We Listened. So if you give us feedback, we want to get right on it. We're already doing number 1 here. We're already working on number 2. We're twisting some arms. This is the heavy lift for us, but you'll see some technical stuff coming out soon. We're definitely going to start everything on time, and you've already seen me play a different song on the harmonica. So thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you for the feedback.
Our lawyers want you to know that when you attend any of our webinars or watch any of our movies, you're agreeing to the terms of service located at the link on the screen. We're also required to provide this abbreviation of what our terms of service include. The main point we need to get across is that regulations change on a regular basis, and we want you to know that what we present can sometimes be very time-dated information or our own interpretation of new guidance or regulations. The materials we present today are subject to change. Also, whenever we provide free boilerplates as part of our webinars or movies, we're required to point out our transfer of copyright agreement, which is also located on our website, in our IT resources library. You can read it by going to the link on the screen. Please also note, by attending an infotex webinar or by receiving any infotex movie, you may be added to our mailing list. We apologize if you'd rather not receive notice of other free education. You can always opt out at the link on the screen. one last thing before we introduce our moderator, Michael Hartke. We'll be initiating a survey directly after the webinar, and we ask you to take a minute to fill it out. We would really appreciate it. And now, it is our pleasure to introduce to you our webinar moderator, the code curator and special envoy from the SIEM, Michael Hartke.
Hello everybody, my name is Michael Hartke. I'm the curator of code here at Infotex and your moderator. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them as you see pictured here. We will make sure they get answered. We'd like to point out destinations on our website, webinars.infotex.com, where you can find our upcoming webinar topics and event schedule, and then also movies.infotex.com, where you can find the movies of these webinars and training videos. Today's webinar is a new format based on feedback from our clients. We call this new format the webinar short, where Dan has been challenged to keep the webinar to 20 minutes or less. Today's webinar short is a must-see for anybody using the Infotex SIEM, as well as other security professionals simply interested in how risk management works in a typical bank. The reason for this is simple. Infotex defines our SIEM not as a database, but as a process involving three teams of professionals: the incident response team, the internal tech team, and the managed security service provider.
So I'm going to do a talk today about the three teams in technology risk monitoring. So let me just say that from time to time, I find myself in meetings with these three teams. I mean, of course, there's Joe and Jane ISO, information security people. There's the incident response people. And is that me? Sophia, is that me? Am I in a cartoon or am I in a live video?
Dan, it's a blend.
Oh, it's a blend. Okay. Well, that's just that's kind of freaky there. So, all right. So anyway, what we're really talking about here is the last part of a talk or a discussion about risk management, where we talk about how the SIEM plugs into risk measurement, risk response, and then, of course, risk monitoring. And so what we're really talking about for this webinar is, what do we monitor? And of course, we monitor the three ways that we respond to risk. There's monitoring risk transference, which of course is, outsourcing things, vendor management. It's also, insurance, that sort of thing. There's monitoring risk mitigation, which could be also in the form of, audit tracking, processes, right? But also risk mitigation could also be in the form of making sure that whatever we decide we're going to do when we bring in a new asset by way of controlling the risk is actually done, or it could be in the form of making sure that the new controls that we agreed to put into place during the last GLBA risk assessment is being done, et cetera, et cetera. And then finally, there's what the SIEM does, which is assist in the monitoring of accepted risk, which should be watching for threats exploiting vulnerabilities where we don't have the controls in place yet. In other words, monitoring the mitigation of risk before it's actually mitigated. And then finally, looking for threats exploiting vulnerabilities. It's what we're really well known for, because not only do we have signatures that are meant to look for known threats exploiting known vulnerabilities, but we also have human beings watching your networks 24/7, looking for the behavior of a threat exploiting a vulnerability, whether we know the threat or whether we know the vulnerability. We can still see the behavior. And so more specifically, this kind of materializes in assets with PII, right? So we're going to focus our event log management on any kind of servers, any kind of assets that data in storage has PII or personally identifiable information. MPI, you might call it, for our healthcare, clients. It's EPHI that we're wanting to watch, as well as credit card numbers and that sort of thing, right? So, but perimeter defenses, of course, malware, the performance of all of our security tools. Are we enforcing policies? Do we see jokes being forwarded, which is the behavior of threat exploiting a vulnerability, or do we just see people emailing social security numbers because we see social security numbers in the perimeter of the network in the clear? That's an example of policy enforcement issues that we're looking for. But availability, administrator activity, we've talked about it with you during the tuning process. But ultimately, what is very, very important also to monitor is the health of the system. And so we have a situation, by the way, where, we're listing all this stuff that we're monitoring, and we're listing health at the bottom of it. But just so you know, without the health of the system, we can't monitor any of this stuff. And so what we're really talking about is not just the buzzword nowadays, threat hunting, which is the process of looking for threats exploiting vulnerabilities and looking for that behavior. And just so you know, as a non-technical, incident response team member, if you're watching this in your incident response team meeting, just know that there's a lot of stuff that you can help us with when it comes to threat hunting. Right? You're going to be aware of termination issues. You're going to be aware of potential mergers or whatever long before the IT people are. So it's one of the reasons why we need the non-technical people in the incident response team to plug in. But also, back to monitoring the health of the system, we also need the non-technical team to assist with that, because infotex will report on the health of our systems, but there needs to be somebody outside of infotex making sure that the health of the system stays appropriate as well. And so how does this look? Well, it basically kind of comes back to, beyond where you can help us non-technically, where, we've already talked, right? But we also want a situation where we're always looking for threats exploiting vulnerabilities. We're always looking for the behavior of a threat exploiting a vulnerability. And that's why really you've hired us, because we're doing it 24/7. We have human beings doing it. But the reason why we're putting on this webinar called The Three Teams is because we can't do it alone. And we're just one of three teams working together as one team. One of the things that maybe distinguishes us as a managed security service provider is that we believe that this here is the fundamental that's going to be in place throughout all time when it comes to technology risk monitoring. There's always going to be the need for an internal tech team that makes changes to the systems. There's always going to be the need for the people who watch the system versus the people who change the system versus the people who, quite frankly, are making sure that we're watching the system and that we're changing the system properly. And these three teams work together as the risk monitoring team. So the internal tech team are the group of people who are responsible for various security tools that require us to change the system in order for us to manage these tools, but then also, applying, patches, making sure that new assets are deployed without a lot of issues, changing the system, right? The incident response team then is responsible for making sure that we are monitoring for non-technical threats like pretext calling, physical breach attempts, legal threats. One of the first times I saw FSS ISAC actually have some good value for the risk monitoring team was when we saw posts about people being sued because their website wasn't ADA compliant, right? That's non-technical risk, we need the risk monitoring team to manage that as well. And yet it's not the internal tech team, it's not the managed security service provider, or for the larger organizations, your SOC, that's responsible for monitoring non-technical risk. And these three teams working together as one team is how we define a SIEM. Now, yes, there's a database that all the alerts and event logs and everything goes into, and yes, there's eventually going to be what we call the SIEM as a place that we can go to when we're in a panic because somebody made a mistake and that mistake involved customer information. But ultimately, that database is going to be changing over time. And as technology improves, as big data improves, as artificial intelligence improves, as machine learning improves, we're going to see improvements in that database application. But that database application is simply a tool that facilitates a security information and event management system, which is three teams working together as one team. And somebody say, can you summarize what the three teams do? Well, good. The managed security service provider, they find the issues. The internal tech team responds to the issues as they're found. And then the incident response team makes sure that the internal tech team has the resources to respond to the issues. And then, of course, the incident response team also handles that inconvenient manner of, or I should say that inconvenient matter of, do we need to notify our customers, right? And so the ultimate success of the risk monitoring team then depends greatly on how well these three teams are going to work together, because it requires a mutual reliance that, if it is working well, makes our defenses almost weapons grade, right? But if we are not able to rely upon each other, then we've got issues. We might have an incident occur that we do not turn into lemonade, if you believe in the theory that you can turn lemons into lemonade. One last thing I'd like to talk about while we're talking about these three teams, at least in terms of who they are and what their responsibilities are, is that segregation is a very important issue in information security that is not yet really being tackled by smaller community-based banks, primarily because they're not able to afford the people that they need to be able to have on staff in order to make sure that the person who's making changes to the system is not the same as the person who's watching the system. And this mutual reliance can help break through segregation issues. In other words, we can have the MSSP watch the internal tech team when they're logged in as administrator, and that might not completely make the segregation issue go away, but it will at least mitigate the risk that arises when we do not have proper segregation in place. And so the way a SIEM actually works nowadays is that your managed security service provider usually handles three different processes: event log management, IPS/IDS, and then change detection. And then these three processes feed data into that application I was talking about that most people refer to as the SIEM. But what the SIEM also includes then are the inputs and outputs that those three teams rely upon. And really, I mean, this could include not only the database application that we call the SIEM, right, but also FSISAC, personnel people reporting that we're forwarding jokes again, using that example again. And so if we can collect this information, if we can organize the way we're collecting this non-technical threat information, we're going to have a bigger, better picture as to our threat posture and our security posture. So now what you're seeing in the gray areas here then is what the internal tech team responds to and handles and manages. And you know, these are not small issues, even though they're just small little bubbles in my diagram here, right? But malware prevention and, unified threat management, firewall management, whatever you want to call it, endpoint security, data loss prevention, and vulnerability management are no small matters. They're very, very important processes that the internal tech team has kind of evolved into handling. And those processes are also a part of the SIEM. And then finally, the ticketing system is hopefully where we tie it all together. We feel the ticketing system is an important part of the SIEM because it's where we make sure we're following up on those issues. If you remember, the SOC finds the issues, the internal tech team responds to the issues, and the incident response team makes sure that the issues are being discovered and responded to. And the way they do that is through the monitoring of the ticketing system. Where I would like to leave us in this webinar is an answer to the proposition that incident response itself is primarily preparation and follow-up. That green bar there on this diagram really should just be one line. It shouldn't even be a space. This is not a scientifically created diagram. This is just created to illustrate the point that the majority of the time that goes into turning lemons into lemonades, the majority of the time that goes into a good incident response program is spent in preparation and a little bit in follow-up. In other words, that post-mortem review. And so because of that, we're also talking about the three teams having a place that they can go to help with the preparation and the post-mortem review aspects of an incident response program. Unfortunately, most SIEM database applications are designed to handle what should just be a little line on this chart here. Okay, 1% of the time we spend in an incident response program is spent actually responding to incidents. The rest of the time is spent hopefully in a place where we can design our meeting agendas, where we can track various information, we can look at trends, we can do post-mortem reviews. Maybe we have an incident response wizard that makes sure that all of the components of our incident response plan that should kick into place when we're in a panic do kick into place. And so we call this as a SIEM as a place, and we feel like if there's going to be three teams working together as one team and they need a place to work that should not be a place that possibly is compromised when they need to come together to work, we believe that the future SIEM should address the SIEM as a place concept. But no matter what we do when it comes to technology risk monitoring, what we also need to recognize is that the reason why it will always be three teams working together as one team is because of the notion of gray matter. In other words, human beings need to respond to technology incidents. The thinking that we can automate incident response, the thinking that information security can be automated is flawed, okay? We do not want to hire a robot to protect us from robots. We can use robots, but we still need human beings making sure that we're combining the predictable incidents with the behavior of incidents in terms of the approach we take towards technology risk monitoring. And so gray matter is always going to be required. We're always going to need those three teams working together. Think about it. The mutual reliance of those three teams is why banks are in a good position from a posture perspective. Banks are the one industry that most human beings can count on to not lose their information. And if you do, you've got a whole process in place to make sure that you notify your customers so that they can protect themselves. If you think about the future of the SIEM, I just want to submit to you that Worf is not from the 21st century, and yet he still is in the business of technology risk monitoring. The future of the SIEM is really what we're looking at right here. The future of the SIEM is the three teams working together to make sure that gray matter is properly leveraging the digital tools that we have available to us to ensure that threats do not exploit vulnerabilities. And having said that, let me see here. I've already played the harmonica, haven't I? Well, just in case. And after that, I guess I only have one last thing to say, and that is never forget, awareness is 9/11ths of the battle.
Great information as always. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Sophia. And thank you for joining us today.
Be sure to check out our movie on how to test your SIEM, located on movies.infotex.com.